All right. Hello, everybody. I'm very excited to be hosting this conversation with Justin from BNS Council, Jeff from Mechanism, and more recently, Org Games, and Orlando from Stacker DAO. So we're going to be talking about all things .btc, the BNS, Bitcoin name service. I think let's start a little bit, back in time. There's actually a very rich history to this protocol. Univ started it using one name on top of this very old blockchain called Namecoin back in 2014, and it's come a very long way since then. That's literally 9 years ago. I'm not sure people quite realize how important and early the idea of basically taking domain names and using blockchain technology to make sovereign ownership of them possible. And I think I would kind of consider them like one of the first main early use cases for blockchain technologies, far before we had words like Web3. So with that, Jeff, I would love to hear, like, you've been in this space for a good minute. What was it like in the earlier days of .btc? Things have changed a lot since then. Could you describe a little bit to us what it was like, back in the earlier days?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, happy to chat about that more. I joined the company that became the Stacks Foundation back in 2018. So it was Blockstack at the time. And I believe that's like right when they rebranded off of one name and adopted Blockstack, which later turned into Stacks. Yeah, so I joined then, and that was right when the Blockstack browser, if anybody remembers that, that's right when the Blockstack browser came out. And so there was a big emphasis on sovereign identity. There was a big emphasis on names, like Bitcoin names. I believe the main namespace back then was .id. So there was lots of .id growth. There was lots of .id sales. There was lots of discussion around like the cost to mint a .id. And I think that a couple things stand out. I'm happy to elaborate on those. A couple things are, one is that the early team there, so this is Mani, Brian, Larry, Jude, those are the main folks. I mean, they really had their head like 10 years in the future. So in many ways, they were like too early. So they were, very, very kind of read up on, the concepts in like the book, The Sovereign Individual. They were so deeply, enmeshed in like Bitcoin culture, and we're seeing all of the ways that this technology would sort of change, the way society works. And they had their head kind of fully in that space, and we're thinking about, what products are useful in that world. And so that's what they were building. It was like the idea was to build, totally sovereign identity that kind of is anchored back to Bitcoin, totally sovereign data storage, apps that you download and run, on your client, so they can't be tampered with. It was like a super exciting time because they really had this like crystal clear version of where all this was heading. And then I think, yeah, the other thing I'd say is that they were too early. Like basically that Blockstack browser product did not catch on, and it in many ways is the same as the stuff that everyone's hacking on now. The core concepts behind it is the same, but it launched and then did not get a ton of traction, and then the team retrenched and as built Stacks 1 and then Stacks 2 and all this stuff. So tons of lessons learned and tons of progress made, but kind of they sort of got it all the way back then. One more thing I'll say real quick is that a lot of the design behind BNS back then also had to do with them kind of deeply understanding the scaling constraints on Bitcoin. And so a lot of the BNS kind of technical trade-offs that were, kind of figured out back then, they were kind of seeing the kind of current pricing congestion we have now and the transaction congestion we have now, and saying like, you can't onboard millions of people into that system because it will just like clog the mempool basically. And so that's kind of a problem that we're all rediscovering right now, but they I don't know, saw it very clearly 5 years ago. So that was another thing that stood out.
Very interesting. Going from you're basically on this kind of alt chain, right? And then you come to Bitcoin L1, learn from that experience on L1. I think there's probably lots of parallels, like you're pointing out, between, some of the experiments going on today and people complaining about fees and, Bitcoin quote unquote breaking and needing to use L2s. It's like history does like to repeat itself, right? so the trade-off was made, and I think it's a very logical design decision to move a naming service to an L2. Jeff, or actually let's see like Justin here. Like what what is like this is very unique. Like most chains have their name service on the L1. What are the advantages, disadvantages, trade-offs associated with having, .btc names living on, an L2 here?
Yeah, thanks. Absolutely. So Jeff kind of touched on fees a little bit, and so when BNS was on layer one, when fees got high, when the network got congested, 2017, 2018, there were times where it was costing, $50 to $100 to register a BNS name. And so when we're talking about scalability and we're talking about, Bitcoin being mass adopted, in a decade from now, how congested will the network be? And if it's going to be this mass adoption and this crazy congestion that we think it'll be, how high will fees be to register on layer one? And so like moving to layer two for the reason of fees alone was very important. In addition to that, layer one really lacks a lot of on-chain logic and consensus. And so when you're registering, when you're transferring, when you're extending names on Stacks layer two, you can see everything is done on chain. You can just see it right in the code. So there's nothing going on off chain. And so really, we've learned today that Stacks extends Bitcoin's functionality, and a name on Stacks extends the functionality of a name on layer one.
Love that. So can you explain a little bit about like rumor has it, word on the street is that, BNS is like looking to kind of do more of a link to L1, like this kind of unexpected resurgence, and like, everybody was complaining about fees, and then we moved to, an L2, and then people are now like doing, these sats names and stuff on L1 again. Again, like this is just a cycle of like we're in a bear market, so the fees are lower, so people are doing L1 again. Have you guys like thought about, doing anything just related to, making a stronger tie between L1 and L2, basically just, but basically following, what customer user demand is, at least at this current moment in time when, fees are decently low right now?
Yeah, so I would say the demand for trading is certainly on layer one right now. And so there has been a lot of talks in the BNS community to kind of get that link to layer one. Jeff, Hank, and a couple others actually have a proposal for that. I think Jeff could probably speak on that a little bit better than I could. So if he wants to jump in, but if not, I can definitely speak a little more about it.
Yeah, Jeff, feel free to jump in here.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, I agree. This is sort of this whole thing is kind of entangled in sort of the cyclic nature of Bitcoin and crypto markets, and like scaling stuff. And I mean, ordinals are just super hot right now. And so yeah, I think there's also like a difference between like where sort of trading markets are versus like where the long-term path of these technologies go. And so it's all kind of quite complex for those reasons. But yeah, there's interest in either finding a way to make BNS sort of compatible with those L1 names, or to migrate them back and forth. So this would be like moving NFTs back and forth between Ethereum and Polygon. This is like the equivalent, moving NFTs back and forth between L1 Bitcoin and L2 Stacks, for instance. So those are like equivalent problems, and so that's the thing that's sort of being worked on right now. There's like the giant thread in the Stacks forum about this right now, with a technical design by my co-founder Hank on how to do it. And so, yeah, I think that the simple way to sort of summarize it now is like, you can think of it like a wrapping process. So you can, wrap the inscriptions and move them over to sort of cheap, fast composable Stacks L2 for a variety of reasons that's desirable. And then you could also do the reverse. You could take your previously registered BNS name on L2, and you can kind of send it over to L1. And there's tech on both sides to sort of prove that like who owns what on both sides of those bridging operations.
Very cool. Very, very interesting. So Orlando, I'm curious from you, everything that we just said there around L1, L2, it's like users say they want L2 and then they want L1 in the bear market. And I'm sure we'll be back to users being very upset about L1 in, a year or something here. Do you have any thoughts on, this kind of basically BNS has lived on many blockchains over the years, right? ultimately, how do you see this fitting kind of long term? What makes sense to you kind of long term? Like what excites you about the vision for BNS over, multiple years? Let's kind of forget like the current state that it's in, and like long term, what gets you excited about it?
One word, functionality. And kind of what you were saying, right, about how obviously now, since it's a bear market, there's not that much traction going on relative to to a bull market. That naturally allows for things to kind of happen more easily on L1. But and maybe people disagree, but I'm kind of a layers maxi. I think a lot of this, right, it just inevitably has to live on some Bitcoin layers, right? Like Bitcoin just doesn't have the capacity itself on the L1 to be able to kind of, if things develop in the way that I think most people in crypto believe it'll develop, Bitcoin L1 just doesn't have the capacity itself to kind of handle everything. And so, and I think, this is where Stacks especially kind of shines a bit, in that with Stacks, you do have an L2 that does have fully expressive programmability through its smart contracts. And so I think this is also kind of what provides, BNS with a lot of its potential, is that it can then be used in a smart contract in a lot of different ways, right? So I've previously have helped to develop some DAO infrastructure. And I personally, when you start getting into how to develop DAOs, how to structure DAOs, you kind of start really immediately start seeing that token weighted voting isn't the way to go. But using something like a BNS, and we've seen this in Ethereum with like ENS, as a kind of like governance token, as a kind of like the pathway into the DAO, and as the way to track kind of voting power in a DAO, I think, for example, is significant improvements over kind of the normal token weighted model. And that's just kind of one use case, right? You also have Web3 social, and a ton of other types of use cases that then can use this naming system, it's just a white space, right, of how you can kind of use the naming system. So kind of looking ahead long term, I think that's kind of what makes me so excited about BNS. Because I mean, right now there's a lot of trading, there's not too much functionality, but Bitcoin is also early in terms of it's kind of like, it's the earliest chain, but also, or it's the first chain, like first blockchain, obviously. But in terms of like this whole scaling narrative and conversation and development, it's pretty early. And as we've seen in other ecosystems like Ethereum, right, a lot of things happen on the layers, and you've seen Ethereum layers kind of massively increase the last year, even in this bear market. And so if you just look at Bitcoin, which has even less functionality at the L1, I think the natural assumption is to believe that we're going to see a stronger kind of explosion in growth on the layers. And I think this is where BNS will really shine.
Totally. I definitely agree that, Bitcoin as a larger community basically decided that scaling in layers is the approach that it's going to take. And, Ethereum has been taking the layer 2 ecosystem extremely seriously now for about a year and a half, 2 years, and it's starting to pay off. And I think, Bitcoin, has, Stacks and Lightning and making like good strides. And, I think we probably just need to get the broader community a little bit more on board with the fact that, okay, we're going to be scaling in layers. We need to take it a little more seriously. Like, it's excellent points. And I do think, the idea of a decentralized DNS system, on Bitcoin is the utility, is in the name, right? Like literally, unless we're going to be, referring to each other as like IP addresses, these like Bitcoin addresses that are these long strings of characters, it very much makes sense to have a DNS system native to Bitcoin, right? So you were referring to the idea of a DAO governing things in crypto and Web3 and governance tokens. Justin, I believe you were on the DAO for like the BNS Council DAO. Can you talk a little bit about the change a few months ago to be the BNS community and where that's all at and the current thinking there?
Yeah, totally. So with the BNS DAO, with the BNS community, we're just like a group of volunteers on the council. And so we really like wanted to become like an official DAO, and hearing what Orlando said, about using your BNS name as you're voting, that's something that we should look into for sure. But we were all kind of like, we're a bunch of people, volunteers in a bunch of different countries, and doing like the legality of an ICO and dropping a token just didn't seem like our best foot forward. You know, we thought our time was better spent working on BNS and working on making ourselves an official DAO. And we didn't want to be, you know, calling ourselves BNS DAO if we're not a BNS DAO. And so we changed to BNS Community. And it's a name that I really like because it's truly what we are. We're the BNS community. So
I love that. So we're starting to run a little low on time here. We've got about 4 more minutes. I would love to just do like a rapid fire with each of you of the single thing you're most excited about for the future. Okay. Like, you know, what is it about? It doesn't even necessarily have to be .btc. It could be stacks, you know, in general, or something with Bitcoin. But like, what is it that, you know, because ultimately like .btc is this foundational piece of utility in this, you know, giant equation. And if that equation, you know, grows bigger and gets more people on board, you know, they're going to use the domain name system for Bitcoin, right? So what is exciting you guys right now that would have a positive effect on .btc domain names? So let's start with you, Jeff.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think for my answer, I'm gonna maybe zoom way out, which is just to say that yeah, it's also kind of my closing statement maybe. I'm very interested in like identity and sort of power and surveillance and kind of where that shows up in the world. And I do credit, I think, Mani, Brian, Larry, like all those early Stacks folks with you know, kind of giving me that introduction to it, because I sort of really didn't think deeply about this stuff before I got involved in crypto. So it's like sovereign individual type stuff. And so I don't think crypto is like a panacea, like crypto countries and all that stuff. Like I think that I'm very happy to live in an advanced democracy, but I do think like identity and sort of money are really screwed up and broken right now. And so I'm looking forward to the time when we've got, you know, better money and better identity. So I shared this on Twitter today, but like I signed up. I deleted Facebook, you know, a couple years ago. I signed up for Threads. My identity kind of kept on, or my new account kind of kept on getting flagged as not real. I couldn't get in there. I still haven't been able to get in there, but you know, we deserve neutral money. We deserve neutral identity. I think these are like, you know, probably human rights. And we're close. Like I feel like, you know, we actually have a viable path, and so I'm very excited about that, and just want to help, you know, push that forward.
I love that perspective, Jeff. Orlando, what gets you excited right now?
So, and I don't know, maybe people have other views about this, but you know, my view or my hope is that kind of crypto reaches, you know, billion plus users, it becomes ubiquitous in the internet and kind of in our financial plumbing. But I think to achieve that, we really need just a better UX, and it really needs to be that you don't even think about crypto, you don't think about Bitcoin, right? It's just part of the infrastructure. And I think there's a lot of work. I've spoken to a lot of teams recently that are really working on abstracting away a lot of the kind of messiness of crypto. We all know the UX can be pretty messy. Like whenever I move any sort of large amount of crypto, I always like freak out and read the addresses like a million times, you know, and I've been doing this, you know, for a long time. And, you know, that's how I feel, right? So imagine like anyone who's kind of who's not really familiar with crypto, trying to move any sort of amount of assets. And so I think there's a lot of good work being done on not account abstraction, but just abstraction generally, in kind of blockchain and crypto. And so my hope is that what I'm hoping for is that, you know, truly the next kind of version of the internet and financial services will run on Bitcoin rails, on crypto rails, and it would be so ubiquitous that we just don't really even notice, right? You're just gonna go on the internet, you're just gonna send some money to a friend, and it's just you just don't even think about the fact that you're using crypto or Bitcoin.
A very compelling vision. We need to send that message to some of the laser eye maxis. I've heard people say they want it to be more complicated so that there's less people who don't know, you know, their whole stuff coming in. Justin, final response here.
yeah, I'm definitely most excited to see people excited about building on Bitcoin, about these layer twos, about ordinals, about these name services. And you know, Bitcoin's the oldest, most secure, most immutable blockchain, and it's awesome to see it finally seeing the masses happy to be building on it. So
Love it. Final 10 seconds here. I want to hear y'all's most grail.btc name that you guys are holding. maybe Jeff, you just jump in here. Anybody jump in and answer.
I got to go with digits, baby. Low digits always.
All right, just low digits, Orlando. Jeff, you got something for us?
No, I just got Stackatron, man. I got a few others, but that's definitely my baby.
Love it, love it.
Mine's Orlando.btc.
Very nice.
But I do have a few other ones that I kind of
this is your chance. This is your chance.
Want to keep it secret though for now.
Okay.
That I own them. They're on my like non-public facing wallets. So
all right. Sounds like you own 1.btc. All right. Thank you guys. This has been really fun. Everybody have a great day.